Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. I have been reading Mark Twain, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And well, I'm going to read a Facebook post, maybe a couple of Facebook posts. Long before I became a booktuber, I was sharing my thoughts about literature with friends on Facebook, and I enjoy hearing their opinions. It is really only since trying to become a stronger reader that I have gone and become a booktuber. So for about a year solidly before becoming a booktuber, I was reading, I had stepped it up, reading daily, that kind of thing. But in the decade before, I was trying to become a better reader, but didn't really have any idea how to do it. The secret is you just got to do it, for one thing. But I was a lazy reader, so I didn't read much. But when I did read, I would share either little excerpts from the book at hand or thoughts about it. And as I say, I have a handful of good friends on the platform whose opinions I value quite a lot. So yesterday, it will be probably 2 days ago by the time you see this, I made a Facebook post about this book. And I'm probably going to give the title of this video a clickbaity title. It will, I apologize to a certain one of my booktube friends, especially because I think that they will be very upset when I talk about some cherished writers in a negative way. But I decided to throw caution to the wind and do it. Actually, in the booktube community, we have diverse opinions about things. I can like something that you don't like. You can like something that I don't like. And yet we are all somehow conjoined in this magnificent hobby, which entails the love of reading. And I would not have called myself a lover of reading in years past, but I think I am becoming such a creature. So this actually appeared also in a comment. One of my commenters said something about why you are reading a book that you don't like. Life is too short for that. And that deserves actually a lot more thought than I gave it at the time. But I did quote my Facebook post from yesterday as something of an answer. So let me read that post first of all. I'm almost reaching the 50% mark, and I don't think my words can quite express the chaotic shambles I find Twain's Huckleberry Finn descending into. If it weren't so highly regarded as a work of American literature, I'd set it aside. Twain is a great writer. His Prince and the Pauper confirms that, and Tom Sawyer wasn't bad, besides being iconic. But this is just atrocious. Even if he rescues this mess and puts it back on track, it's been 80 pages of subpar material mostly, and has turned into a series of stupid set pieces. It's like what happened to part 2 of Don Quixote, but worse. One of my friends on Facebook is noted Australian artist, Ian Millis, and he had a reply. Well, I had two more comments that I put before I got his reply. The first one was, "I'm glad I never had this for a class." And the second one was, "I suppose the worst of it could be that Huck isn't even a believable narrator. He comes across as a shill for Twain all the way." So Ian Millis wrote, "Interesting. I never thought much of it either. Just assumed it had to be respected for its historical position of being an American thing rather than good literature. But I feel that about a few other American classics too, like To Kill a Mockingbird and The Catcher in the Rye and The Great Gatsby, although I love Fitzgerald's flawed and disordered Tender is the Night." So I responded to Ian and took the thought a little further. I liked The Story of Gatsby, which I read on my own, but couldn't stand the other two, which I was forced to read in school. I also read Stephen Crane's Civil War novel, also much taught in schools, but I missed it then, only to find it extremely underwhelming. I'm a big fan of Crane's poetry. Probably part of the reason for its institutional popularity, as with Huck Finn as far as I can tell, is for its amelioration of slavery. Now I wander back to the Harper Lee novel, but I won't recheck. As for Catcher, I haven't a clue. Salinger is a much beloved author, but he seems awful to me. Then I followed it with 3 of these. I may put this on BookTube and alienate everyone I know. And then Ian got back to me. The Red Badge of Courage? I had to read it at school too. A peculiar choice for an Australian school, I thought even then. I didn't like it either. But by then, my recreational reading was European modernists, from Joyce to Mann, Kafka, Nin, Henry Miller, Hesse, Genet, and lots of Chinese and Japanese poetry, Blythe translations. A pretty weird mix looking back on it, but it makes it obvious why I despised Salinger. So it occurs to me that one of the functions, we like to tell ourselves that when it comes to literature, we find in it a place for the genuine, but we also find other things in it as well. One of the things that we find in literature is comfortable lies, and it occurs to me that there might be a little of that in the aforementioned works of literature. Certainly not entirely, and not necessarily even intentionally. But let me read you a quote that I also posted later from Mark Twain's novel, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. He was drunk and weaving about in his saddle. He was over 50-year-old and had a very red face. Everybody yelled at him and laughed at him and sassed him, and he sassed back and said he'd attend to them and lay them out in their regular turns. But he couldn't wait now because he'd come to town to kill old Colonel Sherburne, and his motto was, "Meat first and spoon victuals to top off on." He sees me and rode up and says, "Whar'd you come from, boy? You prepared to die?" Then he rode on. I was scared, but a man says, "He don't mean nothing. He's always a-carrying on like that when he's drunk. He's the best naturedest old fool in Arkansas. Never hurt nobody, drunk nor sober." Boggs rode up before the biggest store in town and bent his head down so he could see under the curtain of the awning and yells, "Come out here, Sherburne. Come out and meet the man you've swindled. You're the hound I'm after, and I'm a-gwine to have you too." And so he went on, calling Sherburne everything he could lay his tongue to, and the whole street packed with people listening and laughing and going on. And then my comment. I think Twain was offering up an image of how Americans would like to see themselves. In that particular segment, which I just read, it stands out pretty starkly. I don't suggest that that was all that Twain was trying to do in his book or all of his books, not at all. But he is an example of a writer who perhaps was a little bit too good for his own good. So he knew very well that if he needed to pull a good yarn out of his ass, he could do it. He had that ability or capability. He was not tepid. He was not tepid in his self-confidence. And so where he says, what was it? Well, the whole street was packed with people listening and laughing and going on. He don't mean nothing. He's always a-carrying on like that when he's drunk. ... Never hurt nobody, drunk nor sober. And that's the image that Americans would like to have of themselves or ourselves. And all of the gunplay in Huck Finn is really kind of, it also plays into an American obsession. Of course, I've talked in another video how Jim, the escaped slave, aside from being a 3 grades below the lowest of Abbott and Costello foil for Huck Finn, he is a man content to be the sidekick to this little white boy. I said a Macaulay Culkin type, were he to be cast in a movie of the day, a little suburban boy out on adventures. And the novel does not recognize that every second from the moment that Jim has escaped slavery is a moment of extreme peril for him. Not to mention that his time in slavery also was a perilous sojourn for him. It is, as I say, with the Red Badge of Courage, attempting to poo-poo the institution of slavery, perhaps because Americans could not stomach it. And I think we have gone past that at this point. Some of us have. And so the way that we look at literature which supported our cherished illusions is beginning to change. The times they are a-changing, even as the place America occupies in the world at large is changing. So the way I saw, now I can't remember the name, that Harper Lee thing when we were forced to read it in school, and that other one, The Catcher in the Rye, appeared very differently to a foreigner, but to a Native American, it often was seen differently. And I think that I perhaps was a little bit ahead of my time, and that the future will be looking back on some of these books, indeed, as we look back now upon poems by Rod McKuen, which I must add are not entirely bad. I consider myself something of a fan of Rod McKuen's poetry, but you have to consider the function that this literature plays or played in society. I remember how when I read Don Quixote, I loved book one, or the original Don Quixote. And when Cervantes decided to make a sequel, he carried the gag a little bit too far because he had closed it neatly in that first book. Sequels are never as good, and his sequel then consisted of set piece after set piece. I think that is the proper terminology for it. Made up situations for a yuck, for a laugh. Excuse me. And Huckleberry Finn certainly seems to be evolving in that direction. So a couple of guys, one is the king and one is Bridgewater or something, come on the raft. I mean, I'm having a hard time conceiving of just how big this raft is, because they're rehearsing for a drama. I mean, it's all just stupid stuff where they can butcher Shakespeare. So Twain is clearly playing to an audience that knows Shakespeare, and it's not to say that his mishmash of lines from Shakespeare are unfunny at all. It's just they're not that funny. They're, as I say, a couple of levels beneath Abbott and Costello, I think, and Abbott and Costello got pretty low there sometimes. So these two characters, he neatly picks up a trick from possibly Gogol, referring to one as the king and the other one as, I forget, Bilgewater, as opposed to using their given names, which I believe is how we first meet them. So that's a nice comic touch, which I'm sure he picked up somewhere. But so they are on the raft, and they're planning for this little theater show where they can butcher Shakespeare's lines and have a little sword play. And Twain neglects the fact that the instant that those two white men came on board the raft, a big deal would have been made about the color of Jim's skin. It is not something that would have been overlooked for an instance. Let me see if I can find that little bit of mock Shakespearean. I'm reading this partly on an ebook, and the ebook really destroys the lines, but in Penguin you've got it printed out as poetry, which is how I would assume Twain intended it. So let me leave you with Twain stringing together bits and pieces from Shakespeare. Well, why don't I read the setup to it? So he went to marching up and down, thinking and frowning, horrible every now and then. Then he would hoist up his eyebrows. Next he would squeeze his hand on his forehead and stagger back and kind of moan. Next he would sigh, and next he'd let on to drop a tear. It was beautiful to see him. By and by he got it. He told us to give attention. Then he strikes a most noble attitude with one leg shoved forwards and his arms stretched away up and his head tilted back, looking up at the sky. And then he begins to rip and rave and grit his teeth. And after that, all through his speech, he howled and spread around and swelled up his chest and just knocked the spots out of any acting ever I seen before. This is the speech. I learned it easy enough while he was learning it to the king. To be or not to be, that is the bare bodkin that makes calamity of so long life. For who would fardels bear till Burnham wood do come to Dunsinane, but that the fear of something after death murders the innocent sleep, great nature's second course, and makes us rather sling the arrows of outrageous fortune than fly to others that we know not of. There's the respect must give us pause. Wake, Duncan, with thy knocking. I would thou couldst, for who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the law's delay, and the quietus which his pangs might take, in the dead waste and middle of the night, when churchyards yawn in customary suits of solemn black, but that the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns breathes forth contagion on the world, and thus the native hue of resolution, like the poor cat in the adage, is sicklied o'er with care, and all the clouds that lowered o'er our housetops with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, but soft you, the fat Ophelia, ope not thy ponderous and marbled jaws, but get thee to a nunnery. Go. So that's, I guess, kind of funny. I mean, that kind of thing is a staple of comedic writing. I'm sure I have done as much and worse than that. So don't let me tell you that I am criticizing Twain beyond as something beneath something I might have done myself. Not at all. But I think you can see also that in there he takes it a little bit far sometimes. So when he says, but soft you, the fat Ophelia, and then the ponderous and marble jaws. I mean, he's just carrying it a stitch too far. And so I get the sense that the past, this happens on page 139, 140. So a little bit past the midpoint, and the past 80 pages have been kind of slowing down for me. It has been less than I had hoped for, and I get the sense that it is going to continue in this vein without much of a story, just all of these stupid set pieces. You remember in Don Quixote, everybody thinks it's going to be funny to fool the great Don and set up these elaborate pageants to fool him and then poke fun of him and laugh at him. And I get the sense that the rest of this novel is going to be going to include a lot of these just set up gigs or set pieces. I don't know what is the right word for it. Is it mise en scene? I really don't. But so you have the scene at the fair or whatever before the circus is coming in, and you have the swindler preacher, all very good American types. And Twain knows darn well that when he needs a joke or something like that, he can pull one out, as I say, pull one out of his ass and tell a good yarn, tell a good joke, get some guffaws there. Now, not all of the guffaws, like about the chewing tobacco, really have carried over into our time when the habit has diminished. But even so, you can see how it appealed to the audience or the readership of his day. But I don't really like the notion that a lot of what Twain is doing is killing time. In my day, I wrote plays. And in a good play, ideally, everything should be aiming towards that central point or towards the end point. When you open up the play, something has happened which needs to be resolved by the end. And everything in that play should not lose sight of that end. Now, once in a while, you go off on a tangent, or you can. It's best if you don't, and it took me a while to learn that. To put in a joke or something like that, oftentimes in theater in Chicago, they will take a perfectly good Shakespeare play and add a little something off on a tangent where they can have a penis joke or that kind of thing, because people yuck about it and it's a crowd pleaser. And sometimes legitimately in theater, you have to fill maybe 2 minutes because you know that this character has to go off and change his costume in the interim because he's coming right back in a different costume. So the ideal is not to fill those 2 minutes with just some stupid knock-knock joke, but to actually have action that pertains to the gist of the drama. I think in a novel there's much less excuse for that kind of thing, and there's little excuse for it even in a well-crafted drama. So that is where I am leaving this. I went on a little bit more than I expected to. I did a video recently about, and I'll put some kind of link in the description box, where I read literary critic Robert Scholl's really slamming into Ernest Hemingway. And I was also responding to a video done by Matt Wall. I will link that also. Or if you go to my video, you will find that linked there. I think I'll leave it at that. But I realize that some of these writers are sacred cows to some people. And I think from a critical standpoint, from a booktuber standpoint, it is my inclination to just spill it out as it comes and not to worry about the consequences. I did not intend to step on your toes. And if you feel differently, we can certainly agree to disagree. I remember when I was young, I loved the great Laurence Olivier movie, A Little Romance. It was also the first starring role for the well-known actress Diane Lane. Thought it was wonderful. 20 years later or something, mentioned it to a coworker, and he watched it and was aghast and appalled and thought it was the worst thing he had ever seen. I don't know why I said worst. I mean, he would have said worst. I'm thinking about one of Twain's many dialects, I suppose. He is keen to tell you that he knows all the different dialects. Let me read you that. Let's see where it is. Now I don't see it here. Oh, here it is, explanatory. In this book, a number of dialects are used, to wit, the Missouri Negro dialect, the extremist form of the backwoods Southwestern dialect, the ordinary Pike County dialect, and the modified varieties of this last. The shadings have not been done in a haphazard fashion or by guesswork, but painstakingly and with the trustworthy guidance and support of personal familiarity with these several forms of speech. I make this explanation for the reason that without it, many readers would suppose that all these characters were trying to talk alike and not succeeding. So, Dialect is another thing. I despise dialect of any form in literature for the most part. I will abide it in the poems by Robert Burns. I will abide it in the poems by Paul Laurence Dunbar. And in fact, in both of those writers' cases, I believe that their dialect work was better than their standard English work, as standard English stood at the time. In my own forays into writing, as a writer, it's something you want to try your hand at some point. And as I look back over my career, those are the biggest embarrassments. Fortunately, they have not happened so often. And at one time, I even did an adaptation of the famous Richard Wright novel, Native Son. And for that, I decided to eschew writing in dialect form. I decided that I would just write the way I talk, because that is easier for me. And as I say, I don't think dialect ages very well. That is a reason I will probably skip Percival Everett's Jim, his recent novel that everybody is reading, and also probably why I will skip Gaskell's North and South. I've heard that it relies on dialect quite a bit also. I just don't care for dialect as a thing. And now I've gone way off the topic, but back to, I don't want to step on your toes, and my friend with the movie A Little Romance, where reviewers of the day noted that Laurence Olivier gave a masterful coughing fit. He reads it, something like that. So, and I liked the scene with the American tourists somewhere in Italy, and she brings the newspaper to her husband, and or he brings it to her. What does that say? It says dove, dove. Of course, it said dove. Where are they? Some of us will never change. I mean, I don't think I will ever see the movie A Little Romance again. But if I did, I bet I would like it just as much as I did when I was that wee laddie of however many years it was. So we all interpret literature differently. We all react to it in different ways. And as I say, my title may be a little bit clickbaity, whatever I come up with. So I will just leave it there. What is the way Shakespeare ended that play? We strive to please you in every way. So I do on this BookTube channel, even though sometimes I may say something with which you disagree. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.